It began with a sweeping drug raid in a small Texas town.
I'm glad that we got most of the drug dealers off the street.
But soon there were troubling questions.
Absolutely no backup, no wire, no recording, no surveillance, no photograph, no nothing.
A local story that took on national significance.
You began to wonder how many of these cases are really tainted.
And a team of dedicated investigators struggled to find the truth.
We did what the district attorney should have done before he prosecuted one damn case. We went and investigated what happened.
This is a story about the collapse of the criminal justice system in a place called Tulia, Texas.
Were they really guilty or simply railroaded in Texas?
Imagine this. You are asleep in your bed in the early morning hours. Suddenly, police in flak jackets and hoods come in and arrest you. They charge you with a crime you didn't commit. The only evidence against you is the word of one man, but the jury convicts you anyway. Not here, not in America. Well, you're wrong. Tonight, come on a journey with us to a small town you've probably never heard of, but should have. A place called Tulia, Texas.
On July 23rd, 1999, the early morning quiet in Tulia, Texas was shattered as lawmen from around the Texas Panhandle descended on what had always seemed to be the law-abiding seat of rural Swisher County. In a lightning drug raid, police officers and sheriff's deputies surrounded houses, swooped around corners, and made mass arrests in a stunning display of force. For some, the images of lawmen in body armor and even hoods escorting black suspects to jail evoked memories of a different era. It seemed like a made-for-television event as a ragtag parade of reputed dealers and drug kingpins walked the Perp Walk.
What people saw on the news that night was maybe a dozen people being hauled across the courthouse lawn. Many of them were half-dressed, their hair uncombed, they were cuffed.
The sweep appeared to be a staggering success, and with more than 30 people arrested that day, the local jail even ran out of room. The overflow was sent to neighboring counties and towns as far away as Amarillo. That day, the good citizens of Tulia, Texas, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief.
We hate in this community that there were 46 people that were selling drugs, but and probably substantially more than that selling drugs in the community.
Most of the people said, boy, I'm glad that we got most of the drug dealers or drug sellers off the street. Maybe they won't infiltrate into our school and sell it to our kids.
It wouldn't make the network news that day, or for many days to come.
It amounted to about 10% of the entire black population in Tulia. Extraordinary event. Should have been national headlines in the beginning, whether the people were guilty or not. Just the idea that this raid had occurred should have been big news.
Tulia, Texas, a farm town of 5,000, where most people simply struggle to survive. It hardly seemed a hotbed of drug activity, and there certainly were no signs of the fast money that comes with the illegal drug trade.
Tulia is definitely not what it used to be, and the reason is the same reason for any small town that relies on agriculture. No matter how hard they work, they just can't make the same kind of living that their parents made in agriculture.
While drugs were not an obvious part of the Tulia landscape, religion was and is. With more than 20 churches serving its small population,
I was 31 years old.
Cowboy preachers minister at Wednesday night suppers, and those looking for a stiff drink, or even a beer, better go elsewhere. Tulia's a dry town.
We're certainly rural, and we're certainly not as sophisticated as some, and we're thankful for that.
I like Tulia. It's a quiet town. You don't have to worry about the drive-by and people breaking in your house and stuff like that. So I don't want to live anywhere else.
Apparently, Sheriff Larry Stewart, Tulia's top cop, saw another side of his town. In the mid-1990s, he became convinced that trouble was lurking in the shadows of Tulia's back streets. The scourge of illegal drugs.
People that live in communities that don't think they have a drug problem in their community probably have their head stuck in the sand. And Tulia is no different.
Everybody in town pretty well knows that there's certain hangouts where there's drugs going on.
A small block of public housing occupied largely by black families had frequently been described by locals as a center of drug activity. An area next to a convenience store was another. So in late 1997, Sheriff Stewart took his first step to rid Tulia of its drug problem. He began working with the Regional Panhandle Narcotics Task Force to set up an undercover drug sting. An undercover agent, whose face was unknown in Tulia, was assigned to man the operation, alone.
I was deep undercover. Nobody knew where I was or who I was, not even the police.
Agent Tom Coleman was young, enthusiastic, and certainly seemed eager to make a name for himself. Coleman wanted his first undercover assignment to be his big break, and he took to it with almost religious zeal.
If you're going to be a cop and identify people, you're going to have to know what you're doing, because you're going to put them in jail for a long time for selling narcotics.
He assumed the alias of T.J. Dawson and basically went to work in Tulia, tried to live down there, and tried to work his way into the drug culture.
Mr. Coleman was told when he came into the county to go wherever his investigation led him. No one was off limits.
Coleman began by finding work in a busy place, Tulia Sale Barn, where cattle are auctioned weekly. That's where he met Elijah Kelly.
I was working at the sale barn, and he come out there and he applied for a job to help on Mondays, and that's how I met him.
Casey's cattle right up here down the road.
Coleman befriended Kelly, a semi-retired laborer and longtime Tulia resident. Hungry for information, the agent plied Kelly, a former alcoholic, with liquor.
And he started asking me questions about did I know where I could get some cocaine at. Oh, there was a few guys that I knew that did do it. And so that's how we got hooked up together.
According to Coleman, Kelly then became his tour guide to the seamy underside of Tulia. Coleman remained deep undercover, keeping his true identity a secret. He told Kelly he was buying drugs for girlfriends. Day and night, they cruised around town, searching for anyone who would sell them drugs. The results of Coleman's investigation appeared to be nothing short of remarkable.
They left Coleman out in the field for 18 months, during which time he claimed to have made over 150 different cocaine buys and a few marijuana buys from 46 different defendants, which in a town of 5,000 people is an incredibly impressive number.
2 or 3 times a week, he would make the 50-mile trip to Amarillo to test and then log in the drug evidence that would prove to be critical at trial. Finally, by the summer of 1999, Sheriff Stewart and DA Terry McEachern had seen enough. Thanks to Coleman, there was now enough evidence to pursue multiple convictions. The grand jury wholeheartedly agreed. They indicted 46 people on 132 separate charges of selling drugs. The prosecution's first target was Joe Moore, and his case looked like a slam dunk. Moore had a prior drug conviction, and for years had run an illegal nightclub outside of town. With Coleman's testimony and evidence, a jury convicted Moore with blinding speed. The sentence for selling 3.5 grams of cocaine, 90 years, a virtual life sentence. Other guilty verdicts quickly followed. Sentences ranged from 20 to 341 years. The clear message: if you're caught dealing drugs in Tulia, you're going to jail for a long time. Defense attorneys could do little else but try to cut deals for their clients.
I concluded that I could not win them and that the exposure to my clients was huge. We were watching verdicts come back that were just huge.
The trials and convictions continued into the year 2000. And Tom Coleman, in his first undercover investigation, had become a superstar. Already a local hero in Tulia, Coleman was honored as Texas Lawman of the Year. But soon, questions about his investigation would begin to surface from a most unlikely source. On July 23, 1999, the small Texas town of Tulia was shaken to its core. After an 18-month-long undercover investigation, more than 40 people had been indicted for selling drugs. Many in town were stunned by the scale of the roundup. But there was at least one person in Tulia who was skeptical of the arrests. Gary Gardner, a retired farmer and crop duster, is an unlikely investigator. But his gut instinct was that at least some of the defendants simply weren't smart enough to be drug dealers.
A couple of them in particular don't have the intelligence basically to keep themselves out of the weather.
Gardner has always lived in and around Tulia, and he's always asked a lot of questions. Those who like him call him earthy. Those who don't call him a troublemaker.
Me and my wife, we started investigating. Ma and Paul Kettle, they got their little tape recorder and their pad, and we started attending trials and talking to people.
What he was hearing just didn't add up. Gardner wanted to know how a town that couldn't even keep a Dairy Queen in business could support 46 drug dealers.
If each one of the 46 drug dealers has only one customer, you'd think, well, you know, somebody would be caught in possession. But what's unique in Tulia, nobody ever got caught in possession. We were extremely heavy on drug dealers, but extremely light on users.
Gardner also couldn't understand the allegation that Joe Moore was a drug kingpin. Moore, a leader in the black community, could hardly be described as living the high life.
Drug dealer, Joe Moore, the kingpin of the Tulia drug dealers. Santa Claus, the mayor of Blacktown, that's who lived here, Joe Moore. He fed hogs for a living. This is pretty well the typical Tulia drug dealer house. The stucco's falling off the walls. You go around the back side, about half the windows is knocked out. The shingles is blown off of it.
And what about Leroy Barrow? He was accused of selling Tom Coleman almost 2 grams of powder cocaine, worth about $150. But Barrow spends his days collecting cans.
That's what I do for a living, pick up cans and do all jobs. Wherever I can get my hands on, do a little work, try to make it. I don't even have electricity on this place here, but I'm happy.
I'm talking about a guy that picks up cans for a living, and he's supposed to walk around with $200 8-ball in his pocket. Didn't happen.
But Gardner was dismissed as a crank, and Barrow, after spending nearly a year in jail, decided it was too risky to face a judge and a jury. He pled guilty to a lesser charge to avoid a longer sentence.
I was just telling these people about you.
But Gardner wouldn't give up.
The first real investigation I did was 2 or 3 of the black ladies had attempted to get a copy of the indictments for everyone that was indicted, and the local district clerk refused to give them to her. And they asked me, I says, well, they got to give them to you. You just ask for them. They're open records. And I'll be darned, they wouldn't give them to me either. And that kind of triggered me as to, you know, what in the hell are we hiding if we won't let people have the public records? It took about 3 months, actually, before I got them.
Believe it or not, Gardner was the first person to look at all the evidence from all the cases together. And when he did, a clear pattern emerged that few people had noticed. Coleman had reported buying the same drug, white powder cocaine, in almost every case. To Gardner, that just didn't make sense.
Crack is the predominant drug in the black community of Tulia. The 132 indictments that I originally acquired were where it finally dawned on me that every case was for white cocaine, and it was always for what he called an 8-ball.
As the trials continued at a relentless pace, Gardner's voice seemed to be the only one raising questions about Tom Coleman's investigation.